You're listening to the Scotty C and Rye Show. I'm Rye Masuda. Appreciate you checking out the pod today. I'm going to be going at this solo. Scotty C has sabotaged the last two podcasts that we have done over this week, and part of me thinks it's because he doesn't want to face the fact that his Oregon State Beavers, a preseason top 25 team, opened the season with a loss at home in Reser Stadium to Eastern Washington, a team from the FCS or 1AA, basically the division below what a lot of the BCS conference and most of college football plays. So part of me thinks Scott is he just can't really face the music. He can't really come to terms with it since college football is the most favorite time of the year for both of us. So I'm going to be going at this today because I want to catch you guys up on what happened in week one. I want to look ahead to week two of the college football season, give you guys some winners, and also take a look at some of the NFL games that are going to be starting because it's the NFL. With the NFL starting, we also have the start of fantasy football. So I got a couple of dilemmas that I might try to talk to. So appreciate you checking us out, and let's go. We'll start by recapping a little bit of the LSU-TCU game. That was one of the huge matchups in week one. Both Scott and I were really, really confident in LSU covering the 4.5-point spread. LSU came out extremely dominant, and with a final score of 37-27, doesn't really tell the whole story. LSU outgained TCU 448 yards to 259. Zach Mettenberger, my boy, the Messiah, looked fantastic under Cam Cameron. The offensive line gave him tons of time. La'el Collins at left tackle had a fantastic game, blocking for him, covering his blind side. La'el Collins was actually named the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week for his efforts against TCU. So really encouraging performance for any LSU fan and anyone who is skeptical about what Cam Cameron and Zach Mettenberger would do. I think those questions were answered immediately as, Mettenberger had both Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. go over 100 yards receiving. That was the first time since 2001 that LSU had two receivers go over 100 yards in the same game. Had quality rushing performances from Terrence McGee and Alfred Blue. Both guys carried the ball for around 90 yards each. Terrence McGee had 2 touchdowns. Alfred Blue had a critical fumble, though, in LSU territory on the 6-yard line, which actually led to one of TCU's touchdowns. Final score, not really indicative, like I mentioned. TCU got 21 points off a 100-yard kick return. The last time LSU gave up a kick return was 2008 against Florida, I believe it was. So LSU doesn't give up kick returns, and that kind of illustrates it. Also, Ego Ferguson stupidly committed a roughing the passer foul on a 3rd and long that was an incomplete pass, allowed TCU to extend their drive, and they ended up scoring there. And also, I mentioned Alfred Blue's fumble on the 6-yard line. So TCU got 21 out of their 27 points off LSU mistakes. Very correctable, but LSU, their defense, they looked good. Linebackers, didn't really make as much noise as kind of everyone had predicted, but I think that's because the front four, led by Ego Ferguson, Daniil Hunter, Jordan Allen, and Jamari Rasco, those guys all played extremely well, put a lot of pressure on Casey Paul Hall, forced Gary Patterson to go with Boykin in the second half after Casey Paul Hall came out on his first series and chucked up a Hail Mary interception to Jalen Mills. So an extremely encouraging performance from LSU. They were one of the SEC teams that really showed up this weekend, and LSU, for their efforts, was rewarded by the number 9 ranking in the new top 25 that was released. So LSU back in the top 10, where we belong, looking strong going into this Saturday's matchup against UAB. It's funny story, not so funny then. We can kind of look back on it and laugh now. UAB actually beat LSU in Tiger Stadium in 2000. I don't think there will be a repeat of that. But the spread on this game is pretty high. It came out at 35. It's down to 34.5. This is one of those, I'm not going to recommend you taking LSU to cover the spread because I know last season Alfred Blue, he was our starting running back, ended up tearing his ACL in the 3rd game against Idaho, a rent-a-win. So I think Les Miles is going to be pretty conservative with how long he keeps the starters out there. I don't think you'll see Zach Mettenberger, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry. I don't think you'll see those guys out there for an entire, 3 quarters. I think at the most they might play a quarter and a half, maybe till halftime. Then you'll kind of see some of the backups led by freshman quarterback Anthony Jennings. Maybe see some of the younger guys on defense that we've kind of been looking forward to seeing. Gerald Brazil, Kendall Beckwith, Tre'Davious White, some of those guys in the secondary who will probably get their chance, along with that big, nasty defensive end to Sean Bauer that came in from New Jersey. So looking forward to seeing what some of the younger guys have. But because of the fact that I think Les Miles is going to pull the curtains back, I really wouldn't recommend taking LSU to cover the point spread here, even though I think LSU will win this comfortably. But knowing LSU fans, because we don't blow them out by 50, someone will be complaining and someone will be saying how Nick Saban could have done better. But that's for the slimy underbelly to deal with. That's not our problem for the rational, conscious LSU fans. Some of the other big Week 1 matchups, North Carolina, South Carolina. I think the big story out of there was a little bit of insane criticism of Jadeveon Clowney for his tiredness and possibly taking plays off. Even though North Carolina ran every single play they could away from Jadeveon Clowney, South Carolina jumped out to a 17-0 lead. They were pretty comfortable throughout the whole rest of the game. 95-degree heat in Columbia. Can't really say I blame Jadeveon if he was sick. I think that his conditioning will certainly come in time. And Steve Spurrier, very confident as always. You got to love listening to the old ball coach. And he knew that in Week 2 that they were going to be playing a big, big conference game against Georgia. I think South Carolina and Steve Spurrier always had that in the back of their mind, and I think you'll really see what South Carolina is all about in their Week 2 matchup in Athens against Georgia. Which brings us to the big SEC loss of the weekend, which was Georgia playing in the fake Death Valley that belongs to the Clemson fake Tigers. And basically back and forth, up and down the field. Coming into the game, everyone was really concerned about Georgia's defense. They had replaced 8 starters off the unit from last year. But it was actually Georgia's offensive line that had a lot of problems with Clemson. And if Clemson's defense was able to get as much penetration and as much harassment on Aaron Murray as they did, you got to think with Jadeveon Clowney, and even though South Carolina's breaking in all new linebackers, you have to think South Carolina's front seven is going to present a lot more problems for Georgia than Clemson was able to. So one of the things Scott and I had talked about was we both picked Georgia to cover the 1.5-point spread. And on the day of the game, Scott had actually texted me saying that the spread was Georgia had gone up. Georgia was favored by 3, and he was going to parlay, which essentially means you're trying to hit 3 picks in a row to multiply your winnings. Instead of betting a lot of money on one game, you pick 3 games, and if you hit all 3, you're going to make a lot more money on that. So his picks were LSU to cover the 4.5 against Washington or against TCU. Colorado, who was a 2.5-point underdog to Colorado State, so he took Colorado to cover there, and he went with Georgia. And even though I had originally said that I was on board with Georgia at plus or at -1.5, I did a little bit more research and saw that Mark Richt was 1-9 against top 10 opponents since 2008. And when you have that kind of track record, I just backed off completely, because after sitting there and thinking about it as I prepared for LSU's game day celebrations, I realized that Clemson, we don't really have a problem with Clemson in big games. The problem with Clemson is their games against the Wake Forest, the Georgia Techs, the North Carolinas of the ACC. The problem with Clemson isn't so much, Florida State or, they have lost to South Carolina, but they do tend to play South Carolina tough. And, when Clemson tends to have a big game, especially with Taj Boyd at quarterback, they show up. So I started thinking, I was like, do I want to go with the team that shows up in big games and then chokes in, games that are kind of off the radar? Or do I want to go with the team who is very, very prone to struggling in big games against top 10 opponents and seems to clean up on the minnows of the SEC and some of their other lesser opponents? And so I told Scott, I said, Scott, baby, I'm not confident in giving that to you. And if I could have gone back and changed my pick, I would have. But Scott rolled with it. Credit to him. He believed in it. And Mark Richt and the Bulldogs, they fell short despite a huge game from Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley was fantastic. It's pretty much the offensive force for Georgia throughout that entire game. So it'll be interesting to see where Georgia goes from here. A couple years ago, Georgia started out 0-2 with losses to Boise State and South Carolina. They were able to run the table, end up in the SEC championship game representing the Eastern Division. So Georgia, again, 2 tough games to start this year. Can they rebound against South Carolina? They get South Carolina at home. That's a bonus. But to be honest, I'm going to be completely shocked if South Carolina doesn't pull that one up. And in a little bit here, I will get to the spread on that game and kind of who I would pick. I'm not betting on that one, but I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown. I think South Carolina is going to win. I'll give you the point spread here in a short bit. So the other kind of big games we saw, Florida and Toledo, that was a winner that I gave you. I told you to get Toledo on there on the under. They were able to cover. I think Florida, though, was coming out very basic with Brent Pease, the offensive coordinator. They had Miami in week 2. They weren't going to show anything crazy, and I think they know going forward that was just kind of, let's just get these boys out and hit. They were missing a lot of players. But the other big game that kind of stuck out to me was the Washington-Boise State game, because Scott and I both gave you Washington as a winner. Washington was a 3-point favorite, and we were both kind of just thinking to ourselves, why is Boise State ranked? I mean, this team is 2 years removed from Kellen Moore. They haven't done anything that's really justified being ranked like that. And so kind of going into it, we were both just thinking, there's something weird here. And Washington came out and just laid the wood. They took Boise State behind the barn and just whipped them silly. And they actually gave Chris Peterson, Boise State's head coach, his worst defeat as the Broncos man. So Washington came out and made a huge statement behind Keith Price, their senior quarterback. And Washington illustrating what we've thought all along, that the Pac-12 North might be one of the toughest divisions in college football this year, right along with the SEC West. Pac-12 North, strong debut from Oregon, albeit against Nicholls State. Washington looked great against Boise, and as also Stanford's hanging out there in the Pac-12 North. So it's going to be interesting to see going forward, how that division shapes up, if Steve Sarkisian and Washington are really making the big jump that everyone has been calling for the past 3 years. The other big Week 1 story, aside from Johnny Manziel and the Rice Owls, where Johnny Manziel just came out and showed why he is the cog to that entire Aggie offense and why Kevin Summerlin should probably just let him be the head coach, was the debut of someone who I had wondered if he was the reincarnation of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad rolled in one, and that is Jameis Winston, the redshirt freshman quarterback from Florida State. At the ripe old age of 20, Jameis already has a nickname, Famous Jameis, and very well deserving of it. He came out smoking against Pitt and welcoming Pitt to the new ACC. Pitt didn't really have a nice welcoming. Jameis Winston could not have been closer to perfect if he tried. I believe he only had 2 incomplete passes. And give credit to Pitt, and it was one of the things that I noticed kind of gave me a little pause for concern going forward for Florida State. Florida State's offensive line did not look very good against Pittsburgh, and people were kind of dismissing Famous Jameis's performance against Pitt, saying, well, it's just Pittsburgh. Well, the same can be said for the offensive line. It's like, well, it's just Pittsburgh, and they had trouble protecting Jameis Winston against them, but credit to Winston, he made some fantastic across-the-body throws, and they were off balance. There were some he didn't set his feet, and he was still whipping it in there with plenty of strength, plenty of zip on the ball. So if I'm a Florida State fan, I am stoked. I am very excited about these next few years because, for me, I thought Jameis Winston looked better in that game than I'd ever seen E.J. Manuel look in any game in his years at Florida State. So that may just be me overreacting to the Pittsburgh win, but I thought Jameis Winston looked better than any time E.J. Manuel suited up for the Seminoles. So heading on to Week 2, also got some big matchups coming up here. Although in the SEC, there's really not too much going on. So one of the big SEC games is going to be Florida and Miami, a rivalry game that probably won't get played much more, especially if the SEC ends up going to the 9-game conference schedule with the end of the BCS this year and the start of the 4-team college football playoff next year. So Florida opened as a 3-point favorite over Miami. Miami kind of struggled, wasn't really that impressive against FAU. A lot of these draft gurus have been riding Stephen Morris, the Hurricane senior quarterback's jock, for the offseason, touting him as a first-round pick. And I got to be honest, I haven't seen that out of Stephen Morris over the past few years. I've seen him get benched and switched with Ja'Cory Harris. I've seen him overthrow receivers who are wide open. But apparently this guy throws a really great ball in shorts and T-shirts. But when you get him in live game action, he's not that good, or at least I haven't seen it. So Florida going down to Miami, It's rumored that the game might actually be sold out, which is probably the first sellout the University of Miami has had in about 5 years because not Florida, but Miami fans are just terrible. And so a lot of them are bandwagon people, and they think that since this is a big game with Florida, they might actually show up. So good for you, Miami, for finally selling out a game. But if I'm a betting man, I'm taking Florida to cover the 3 points all day. I think Florida's just got too much physicality on the offensive and defensive line. They're going to get a lot of guys back that were either sick or suspended for the game against Toledo. And Florida has 3 quality running backs. And you might not even see highly touted recruit Kelvin Taylor in this game because Florida's just that deep. And I don't think Miami has the depth, and I just don't think that Miami has enough offense to compete with Florida going forward. Which brings us to the next big game of the evening, which would be South Carolina and Georgia. I kind of touched on this a little bit. Georgia, a 3-point favorite again. So for 2 weeks in a row, they're going to be a 3-point favorite. First one was on the road against Clemson. This one's at home against South Carolina. I just think South Carolina is going to be too much. I don't trust Mark Richt. I mean, he's given me no reason to trust him. It's funny how much momentum Georgia got from losing a close SEC title game to Alabama last year. It's really given them more momentum than any win they've had recently. So I'm not buying Georgia yet. I think Georgia's going to give LSU a real tough test because at that point they're going to be extremely desperate. But I think once again, Georgia starts 0-2. I'm very comfortable with South Carolina covering the 3 points there. It's not a lock for me, but it's pretty darn close. The other probably marquee matchup and another game that we probably won't see for a really, really long time, which is unfortunate, is Michigan and Notre Dame. Notre Dame coach Brian Kelly has basically said, we're not going to be playing Michigan anymore. We don't really consider them a big rivalry. There's kind of been a bit of back and forth between Brady Hoke, Michigan's coach, and Notre Dame coach Brian Kelly. This game will be in Ann Arbor in Michigan, and the interesting thing is Notre Dame is 1-6 in their last 7 trips to Michigan Stadium, the big house in Ann Arbor. So, interesting fact there. It kind of depends on who do you trust in this game. Do you trust Brian Kelly and the team Notre Dame who went 12-0 last year before absolutely getting curb stomped by Alabama in the national title game? Or do you look kind of to Brady Hoke, who is really, despite being left with absolutely nothing from Rich Rodriguez, aside from Devin Gardner and last year Denard Robinson, you got to go with Brady Hoke. He's been a really, really great coach. He's played teams tight. They've really returned to defense, running the football. Those are always winning formulas. As much as Scott hates to admit it, you play good defense, you run the football, you win championships. And that's what the SEC has done for the past 7 years. And that's what Brady Hoke's trying to do at Michigan. He's trying to get Michigan back to that power style that they've always ran. Michigan's always been known for great running backs. And I really think Michigan is going to send Notre Dame out on a losing streak here. Michigan's favored by 4. That's a tough one because I could see Michigan squeaking this out by 3. But I think Brady Hoke is going to go for the throat. I say take Michigan, the 4-point favorite. I'm very confident in that one. I would be shocked if Tommy Rees, who is like an 8th-year senior for Notre Dame, is able to go in there, and especially with Notre Dame's young defense, I just don't think Notre Dame has the chest or the want to win this game in the big house. So I'm going with Michigan and Brady Hoke at -4. Take it to the house. So let me give you some winners here, because even though we're not dealing with a lot of interesting matchups, there's definitely a few where I think some money can be made if you decide to take up gambling. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying if you decide to do it, maybe take a look at some of these games, give them some thought. The first one I'm looking at is USC Washington State. This is at USC. USC was kind of ho-hum against Hawaii in their opener. Washington State traveled down to Auburn and covered. Washington State lost to Auburn, I believe it was 27-21. That was one of the winners Scotty C gave you. He took Washington State. Unfortunately, he didn't bet on them, but that was one of the winners he gave you. And Scott and I had talked about this a little bit in some of our lost shows, but he is leaning towards Washington State on this one. USC is a 15.5-point favorite. I say you take USC to the bank. I think USC is going to cover this one. I think they're going to cover it very easily. Washington State, that's two big road trips in a row. They go down to Alabama, then they have to travel back to the West Coast to play USC in the Coliseum. 15.5 points is not that much considering how bad Washington State has been over the years. At the end of the day, USC, they're not really settled on a quarterback situation, but they do get Silas Redd, their leading rusher from last season. They get Silas Redd back for this game. I just don't think whoever's throwing the ball for USC, they still have Marquise Lee on the outside, and I don't think there's anyone on Washington that can cover Marquise Lee, can hang with him. So I'm very confident in giving you USC as my winners, one of my winners. They will easily cover the 15.5-point spread. And, you have to remember with the Washington-Auburn game, Auburn has a former linebacker playing quarterback. So, Gus Malzahn, everyone's really excited about him down there because of what he was able to do with Cam Newton. But let's face it, anyone except Ron Rivera can do great things with Cam Newton. So the next winner that I'm going to give you that I've been looking at and kind of paying some little bit of peace of mind to is Bowling Green at Kent State. Kent State was one of the teams last season who was in the running for that at-large BCS bid that eventually went to Northern Illinois. And Northern Illinois, fun little fact that I've probably mentioned a few times, but I'm just going to mention it again because I always find it necessary to throw it out there. Northern Illinois is one of only 3 teams that the ACC has beaten in BCS bowl games. The other 2, Virginia Tech and Cincinnati. So the ACC, a lot of people thinking the ACC might be the conference that ends the SEC's dynasty and national title games. Well, you guys should probably beat someone else in the BCS bowl games other than Northern Illinois, Cincinnati, and Virginia Tech. So aside from that little tangent, the Kent State Golden Flashes finished last season 12-1. They returned the nucleus from that team. Had kind of a ho-hum opener, but it was kind of difficult for them to get up for that game. There wasn't really a marquee opponent. And when you go 12-0 and you miss out on a BCS bowl and then you lose you get slotted to a lesser bowl game, you end up losing. It's kind of something that would happen with LSU. Now, obviously, LSU should have beat Clemson, but LSU finished second in the SEC West last season, and they ended up getting the 6th choice bowl for the SEC, which was the Chick-fil-A Bowl. So you can kind of understand the lack of motivation. Bowl games are always a tough measurable. But Kent State gets Bowling Green at home, and this is a conference matchup. Bowling Green is going on the road to Kent State, and Bowling Green is actually favored by 7 points here. So I'm very confident in Kent State. I think Kent State's nucleus, a conference game, they know how important those are. They're going to be up for it. Take Kent State to cover the 7 points, possibly even win this one. One other winner that I've been looking at that is, it's always a question of these option teams. A lot of teams who never face the option or they only have 1 week to prepare for it, they tend to get gashed for it because it's something, especially with the triple option, it's very, very difficult to prepare for. So one of the ones that I'm looking at, I see Army covering the 7.5 against Ball State. And, Angel Santiago is a junior, kind of came in, looked great in their opener, looking just humming the ball, running it, and so they should be really good. Rushed for 123 touchdowns in their first game. So I really would not be shocked if Army was able to cover that there. It's going to be a pretty good one. And the last winner that I will give you is the University of Texas at El Paso. They're taking on New Mexico at home. UTEP is favored by 6. This will actually be the debut of Texas A&M transfer Jameel Showers, who was Johnny Manziel's backup last year, and before that he was backing up Tannehill, I believe. Or I don't know, but I know he backed up Johnny Manziel. So this is going to be his first game. UTEP gets New Mexico at home, and New Mexico did not look good in their opener. UTEP, they have a former alumni as their coach, and I would just be completely shocked if New Mexico was able to do anything in this game. And I mean, even if you're at UTEP, you're still getting Texas athletes at the end of the day, whether it's the 3rd or 4th choice. You're still going to do better than what's in New Mexico. So I'm very confident that UTEP covers the 6 points. So those are my winners for the week. Good luck. I'm sorry if they don't work out, but I'm pretty confident that they will. Which brings us to the NFL. NFL kicking off tonight. Since I'm recording this on Thursday, not going to be able to talk about Denver and Baltimore since that game will be going on soon. But Denver coming out as a 7.5-point underdog, kind of weird. Baltimore coming out as a 7.5-point underdog, which is kind of weird because Denver's dealing with a lot of injuries. Have injuries to Champ Bailey. He's not playing. Von Miller likes to smoke weed, so he's not playing for the first 6 games. And you're also dealing with an uncertain running back situation. And if any of those guys can't block for Peyton Manning and he just gets crushed by Elvis Dumervil or Terrell Suggs, then that's going to be a very, very, very sad sight to see. So it just seems like such a trap. It's like Vegas is wanting people to take the Ravens. So I'm just going to go with Peyton Manning at home. I feel like Peyton Manning might be into a bit of FU mode after what happened against Denver last year in the playoffs. So let's move on to some other games where you guys might actually have a chance to bet on. First one we can take a look at is Carolina at Seattle, and this is actually an upset that I got going here. Seattle, many people's Super Bowl favorite this season, coming off an improbable year last year with Russell Wilson. But one of the things with Seattle is they're not very good on the road, and Seattle opened up as a 3.5-point favorite. They have to travel to Carolina for a 1 o'clock Eastern game. That's 10 a.m. on the Pacific Coast. So these teams actually played last season, played to a 16-12 game in Seattle. I just think Carolina, even though Ron Rivera is awful, I think Carolina's got a great chance to cover this 3.5, if not win it. Seattle, they got a very easy home schedule. They'll more than make it up. But I think week 1, people might have to take a step back and be like, ooh, that's right. Seattle's not very good on the road. Saints-Falcons. Apparently, I heard an interesting stat today where the Atlanta Falcons and the Saints have opened in the opener 6 times, and the Falcons are 6-0. It's kind of crazy. Who would have thought that? Especially with head coaches like Dan Reeves, Jim Mora. Kind of didn't really expect that one, but the Saints, they finally get Sean Payton back. Everyone's been talking a lot about Mark Ingram this offseason, see what he can do with Pierre Thomas. Drew Brees is always going to be Drew Brees. Darren Sproles is finally healthy. Marcus Colston seems to be healthy. Game is in New Orleans. Matt Ryan, he pooped his pants on national television. I'm all about the Saints in this game. The Saints are a 3-point favorite. I think the Saints cover that one pretty solidly. Another potential NFC title game matchup is a rematch from the playoffs last year. Green Bay, San Francisco. Aaron Rodgers, Colin Kaepernick seems to be a duel that hopefully we'll get to see a lot more of. San Francisco actually opens as a 4.5-point favorite at home against Green Bay. Not so sure about that one. A lot of people are predicting San Fran to roll roughshod over Green Bay. But at the end of the day, Green Bay still has Aaron Rodgers. Their offensive line is a bit of a question mark, and San Francisco has a fantastic defense, but I just don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to allow the 49ers to get blown up in this game. And Green Bay's defense is healthy for the first time in a very, very long time. Last season, I think Green Bay had 8 starters injured on defense. I mean, who does that happen to? So with that being said, I'm very, very confident that Green Bay will cover the 4.5, and Green Bay, I think, has a great chance to win this game. Another big matchup, Dallas and the New York Giants opening up in Cowboy Stadium, Jerry's World. The Giants are actually a 3.5-point underdog here, which is kind of interesting because a lot of people are picking the Giants to win this. I'm actually going to go Dallas. I think Tony Romo, who's had decent success against the Giants in the past, and he's my fantasy quarterback in full confession, so I got to roll with Tony Romo in this one. I think the Giants will get a little bit of solace with the fact that they got all their weapons back, even though they're going to kind of count on David Wilson a lot this year. We'll see how that happens, how that works, but I think the Giants are still a bit banged up. Jason Pierre-Paul, Justin Tuck, still kind of working their way back from injuries. And we all know the Cowboys, they always blow it at the end of the year. They always start off really well, but then they blow it. So take the Cowboys to cover the 3.5. One that I'm actually very interested in is the Monday night matchup and the debut of the architect, my man, Chip Kelly, former coach at Oregon, who's now the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. The reason that I took LaShawn McCoy, number 4 in my fantasy draft, is because of my love for Chip Kelly and what he does with offenses and the running attack. I actually think Philadelphia has a great chance to win the division this year. I think their chances are getting sold short because of a lousy defense. They have the best offensive line in that division, and I just think people are really underestimating what Chip Kelly is going to do. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens kind of in a Monday night primetime matchup with Robert Griffin III, and the reason I think they're going to win the division, kind of what I said before, the Giants banged up on defense. What happens if they don't have a running game again like they did last year and Eli Manning's chucking it all over the lot? That's not a recipe for success with them. Their defense is older. The Redskins, Robert Griffin III, coming off ACL surgery, he's one slip up away. If Robert Griffin III goes out for any extended amount of time, I have no faith in Kirk Cousins. Y'all can have faith in Kirk Cousins. I don't have faith in him at all. So, and people forget, with the Redskins, they were 5-6 last year before they ran the table, won their last 5 games to win the division. So that was a team that was very close to being a disaster and getting Mike Shanahan fired. But they were actually able to save face because Robert Griffin III was just superhuman and came out and just really rallied them. So I am by no means sold on Washington, and that leaves us with Dallas, who has no defense and is basically going to rely on Tony Romo and another reshuffled offensive line to handle the work. And we've seen how that works in the past. It's probably good for 8-8, 9-7. But I just think in this first year, people are really selling my boy Chip Kelly short. So take Philadelphia, big debut. They're a 3.5 point. Take them. Let's see. So covered some upsets, covered the kickoff. I don't know about you guys, but with the kickoff comes fantasy problems, and fantasy football problems are something everyone who plays deals with. Just got so many dilemmas. Who are you going to play in your flex? What are you going to do? You got a points per reception league. My fantasy dilemma of the week, flex position. Sorry, can't talk. Doing this by yourself, not a lot of fun. You just got to keep rolling. You can't take sips from your Pendleton like you would like to. It's just you gotta. I have so much respect for Colin Cowherd at this point. I don't know how that guy does it for 3 hours every day. But so my big dilemma is for Ben Tate against the San Diego Chargers or Kenbrell Tompkins, the undrafted free agent who has been Tom Brady's boy throughout the preseason. So since I play in a points per reception league, you basically get 1 point for every catch that someone has. So obviously that would lead you to maybe favor the receiver, but the Patriots are playing the Bills. I can honestly see Brady and co. getting up early, and it's always tough to gamble on a rookie wide receiver in their first game. So I'm going to roll with Ben Tate. I mean, Arian Foster, who knows what you're going to get from him, but San Diego's defense was pretty stingy last year, so I'm cautiously optimistic about Ben Tate, but maybe he'll get some garbage time touchdowns because Manti Te'o, I think he's hurt still with a sprained boot. So we'll see if that works out for him. So I don't know if any of y'all ever have any fantasy dilemmas. You can email or send a tweet to Scott or myself. Scotty C, though, you might want to chill out on fantasy advice from Mr. Clifford because despite making fun of people who do snake drafts, Scott did an auction draft this year and ended up with 4 quarterbacks. So he's got 4 quarterbacks. He can only play 1. And his tight end is Jake Ballard, who's no longer in the NFL. So take that for what it's worth. But you can always send them to me on Twitter at Rye_Guy or Scotty C at the Scotty C Show. And we will do our best to point you in the right direction like we do with our winners. So my boys, Real Madrid. I know some of you are big soccer fans out there, but finally get the £100 million man, Gareth Bale. Long saga, finally coming to a close. It also led to the departure of Mesut Ozil from Real Madrid. He went to Arsenal for £45 million, so Arsene Wenger finally spending some cash, and they got a fantastic player. Mesut Ozil, people forget, dude's only 24 years old. And he, anytime you can get a 24-year-old creative attacking midfielder like him, you got to do it. He's going to be a fantastic addition to Arsenal. He's going to play. He's going to play extremely well with Santi Cazorla, Oxlade-Chamberlain, Theo Walcott, Oliver Giroud. He's going to be a great addition for Arsenal. And obviously I'll miss him. Congrats to Ozil. He's now the most expensive German international player in German history, which is a very extensive history. But with the emergence of my boy Isco, who's been crushing it since Spain's under-21, the 20-year-old man, he has been holding down the midfield for Real Madrid. He's actually the leading goal scorer for the team. He's got 3 goals from 4 shots on goal. I hate to see Ozil go, but I'm very confident knowing that Isco's there, and Real Madrid's going to be in great hands. But my fiance's personal favorite player on Real Madrid, Kaká, is also, there you go, Kaká. He's also been sent packing, and Kaká, he never really materialized into what Real Madrid thought he was going to be. He spent so much time on the bench. He's in his 30s now. He's always been a real great team player. He's never caused a big fuss. So, I'm happy to see him go home to AC Milan, where he's had so much success in the past. So, best wishes to him. It's his best chance to get back onto Brazil's World Cup squad, and I know that's going to be a huge dream for him. So, going forward, Real Madrid now have 2 of the 3 best players in the world in Cristiano Ronaldo, Gareth Bale, a fantastic midfield, Xabi Alonso, Isco, Sami Khedira, Angel Di Maria, a lot of guys that you can rotate in and out, and a back 4 that's very strong, Rafael Varane, Pepe, Sergio Ramos, and Fabio Coentrao. Those guys are always reliable, but once again, Iker Casillas continues to stay on the bench in favor of Diego Lopez. So even though Iker can start for Spain, he can't start for Real Madrid. So it's kind of weird. Don't really see that too often. Generally, if you can start for Spain, you can start for your club team. But we'll see how that shakes out. But which leaves us with a big qualifier for the U.S. men's national team. These guys could wrap up their trip to Brazil and could book their ticket to Brazil in 2014. They play Costa Rica on Friday, September 6th at 6 p.m. Eastern on BN Sport. The U.S. has never won in Costa Rica, and you have to think Costa Rica is actually due given what happened in Snowmageddon in Denver, where the U.S. won 1-0. The Costa Rican Federation attempted to protest the results of the game. The U.S. is actually playing Costa Rica and then Mexico, so kind of a tough back-to-back slate. The U.S., though, under Jurgen Klinsmann, they have not lost in a very long time. They had their first comeback on European soil against Bosnia-Herzegovina. They beat Italy for the first time. They've just been humming right now. And Josie Altidore, despite picking up a little bit of an injury, he hasn't appeared recently for Sunderland, but all indications are he will play. I'm not sure he'll start because, if he hasn't played for a little while, you probably don't want to rush him out there and start. Don't want to have him get a setback, especially with the kind of form he's been in. He's been so crucial to what the U.S. men's national team has done. He's really made that striker role his own. So it'll be on Clint Dempsey, Landon Donovan, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. Who knows who's going to play left back? If Klinsmann continues to go with DeMarcus Beasley, or if he tries to rotate Fabian Johnson in there at the right back slot. We still don't know who's playing right back for this team going forward, but I'm very confident in a lot of the guys going down there. Wouldn't shock me though if Costa Rica is able to eke out a tie in this one. Costa Rica down there, they're known for real physical, real aggressive, kind of just angry soccer. And it wouldn't shock me if they play 10-man defense, and especially with Josie Altidore being as banged up as he is, Clint Dempsey kind of trying to get himself back into form with the MLS and the Seattle Sounders. It wouldn't shock me if that game ends 1-1, 0-0. It could be one of those just boring games where it's just a lot of defense, a lot of long balls, and there's really not much that the U.S. can do to break through because they're just sitting and parking the bus with so many defenders. But as always, we'll be rooting for them. We'll be extremely happy if they're able to get their first win down there. But I'm just going to be cautiously optimistic because history exists for a reason, and the U.S. has never won down there, but this might be their best chance. So best wishes, boys, and I encourage and fully hope that all of you we'll get out and maybe enjoy a little Friday night happy hour wherever you are in this great country of ours. And check it out. I mean, I don't know, you might not get BN Sport, but there's a lot of bars around that do. So again, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, root on the Yanks. We're just one away from going to booking that ticket to Brazil 2014. So you got to do it. Go Yanks, baby. Go Yanks. So that brings this little solo experiment to an end, my friends. I certainly hope you've at least gotten something out of it, something you can use. Enjoyed kind of my take on some of the winners. Appreciate you checking it out, listening. As always, you can always reach Scott or I on Twitter. Scott's at the Scotty C Show. I'm at Rye_guy. And hopefully, now that Scott's had a little bit of time to digest the Eastern Washington win over his Oregon State Beavers, he'll come back and stop sabotaging it. Because let's face it, 2 is better than 1. And I know this. I'm not a fool. And I miss going back and forth with that crazy bearded guy out in San Francisco. So Scott had mentioned numerous times if Oregon State doesn't start 7-0, something went horribly, horribly wrong. And my man was right. It didn't even last 1 week. They couldn't start 1-0. So maybe next time when he gets back, we can kind of look at what Oregon State did against Hawaii. I know that was a game Scott was looking at. He said he would probably pick Hawaii. Who knows? I am not confident in either one of those two teams. So we'll see what Scott does and what Oregon State does against the Rainbow Warriors. But to all of Scott's friends who might listen to this, and I'm guilty of this as well, when Oregon State goes out and blows it against a 1AA team, we got to lay off our guy. Apparently we were pretty mean to the dude and just kind of compounded what was already a very frustrating situation. So let's be honest, I think there's a few Florida State fans where if they lose to NC State, they're going to hear it this year. And if LSU goes out and loses to Auburn or, loses to someone of a lesser quality, I'm going to be getting inundated by Scotty C, and I think we deserve it. But at the end of the day, NC State and Auburn are Division I teams. So as always, you can always download any of our shows at h3cruising.wordpress.com. That's h3cruising.wordpress.com. And we will be back next Wednesday to give you a recap of Week 2, look ahead to some of the big games in Week 3, give you winners, and hopefully, talk about how the U.S. men's national team have booked their tickets to Brazil. So take care, everyone, and thanks for sticking with me. Peace.